To sustain a war that costs over $1 billion a day, Russia built an invisible fleet. Old ships with hidden owners and disabled tracking systems, transporting Russian oil under the radar of international sanctions. For months, the plan worked, until Denmark decided to act. Using international maritime laws and environmental inspections as weapons, it blocked the heart of Putin's secret trade. A discreet operation, but one capable of choking the main source of funding for Russia's war. To understand why Denmark became such a dangerous obstacle for Moscow, we need to go back a few years, to the moment sanctions began to choke the Russian economy. Right after the invasion of Ukraine, the West imposed one of the largest economic offensives in modern history. Russian banks were cut off from the SWIFT system, exports of military technology were frozen, and the most sensitive target was hit: oil. The European Union, the main buyer of Russian fuel, announced a phased embargo and a price cap of $60 per barrel. That not only reduced revenues, it forced Moscow to sell its oil at steep discounts, often below production cost. For a country where more than 1/3 of the government budget comes from energy exports, that was a direct blow to the Kremlin's financial lifeline. Putin needed a solution, and fast. That is when the Kremlin's most audacious and risky project was born: the so-called shadow fleet, or ghost fleet. With major shipping companies and Western insurers refusing to handle Russian oil, Moscow launched a global hunt for old tankers. Oil tankers more than 20 years old, bought through intermediaries in Dubai, Singapore, and even Cyprus, changed name, flag, and owner in a matter of days. These vessels began operating under flags of convenience, registered in countries with weak oversight and little transparency. The result was a network of hundreds of ships that looked civilian on paper, but were controlled by a web of companies tied to the Russian state and oligarchs close to the Kremlin. And the tactic worked. These ships ran with the minimum of tracking. They turned off their AIS systems, becoming literally invisible to maritime monitoring. On the high seas, they did something even bolder: transfers at sea between ships. Russian oil would load aboard a tanker in the Baltic Sea and, hours later, be passed to another vessel in international waters, often near the coast of Greece or in the Mediterranean Sea. On paper, the receiving ship appeared to be carrying oil originating from an unknown country, ready for delivery to Asian ports such as India and China. It was a clandestine operation, but incredibly efficient. In 2023, that fleet carried more than 1 million barrels a day, a flow large enough to keep Russia's war economy alive. But that fleet, created to fuel the war economy, also turned into a floating time bomb. Most of those ghost ships are over 15, 20, or even 30 years old. They are rusted hulls with obsolete navigation systems and engines far beyond their service life. Many were rejected by legitimate shipping companies decades ago, and now they are back at sea, without technical inspection and without proper insurance coverage. With Western insurers banned from working with vessels linked to Russia, most of these ships rely on shadow insurers based in Hong Kong, Dubai, or offshore tax havens. In practice, this means that if an accident happens, there is no one truly accountable for the damage, and the danger is real. The Baltic Sea is one of the most congested and environmentally sensitive maritime routes on the planet. Every day, dozens of oil tankers cross the narrow waters separating Sweden, Finland, and Denmark. A single mistake, a collision, a mechanical failure, or a leak could turn the entire region into an environmental disaster of historic proportions. According to estimates from the European Environment Agency, the cost of containing and cleaning up a major oil spill in the Baltic could exceed 1.4 billion euros. That does not even include the impact on wildlife, fisheries, and the ocean currents that sustain much of northern Europe. But the risk is not only ecological, it is also geopolitical. As this fleet grew more chaotic, European nations began spotting suspicious behavior. Some of those tankers, instead of following predictable trade routes, made mysterious stops near undersea communication cables. NATO intelligence reports warned about the use of these very same ships in hybrid operations, maritime espionage, electronic surveillance, and even the launch of small reconnaissance drones over Europe's coastal cities. On several occasions, vessels that appeared civilian were caught sailing with modified military radar equipment or transmitting encrypted signals while their transponders remained off. For the Baltic countries, what began as an environmental problem quickly evolved into a matter of national security. The dilemma was clear: how do you contain a fleet that officially does not exist? It was in this scenario, where ecological risk and the fear of hybrid infiltration blended together, that Denmark discovered something no other country had explored: a loophole hidden within the very maritime laws Putin had been using to hide. And it was in the face of this explosive scenario that Denmark decided to act. A small country in territory, but with a maritime position worth gold. On the map, the Skagen Strait is the bottleneck through which nearly all maritime trade in the region flows, more than 60,000 ships a year, from container carriers to giant oil tankers. Whoever controls that passage controls the energy flow of all Scandinavia, Germany, and even Russia. And because the Baltic is a semi-enclosed sea, any blockade there can alter the entire logistical dynamic of Northern Europe. That is why Copenhagen turned its location into a strategic weapon. The Danish government launched a quiet but devastating offensive under the most legitimate pretext possible: environmental protection and maritime safety. Under the new directive from the Ministry of Transport and the Maritime Authority, any vessel suspected of operating without insurance, with irregular documentation, or showing signs of structural wear would become subject to detailed inspections before crossing the strait. These inspections are not simple routine checks. They follow strict protocols: analysis of waste management systems, verification of scrap and maintenance certificates, control of ballast water, and even measurement of sulfur emissions from engines. In practice, what seems like just an environmental inspection is actually a legal blockade. Each ship stopped for safety reasons remains detained for days, sometimes weeks, until it provides full documentation, maintenance reports, and proof of active insurance. And for Russia's ghost tankers, that is precisely the weak spot. Many of those vessels do not even have valid papers, much less insurance recognized by international maritime entities. Each inspection turns into a bureaucratic quagmire. What was once a silent voyage of just a few days through the strait became an uncertain crossing, monitored and subject to million-dollar fines for environmental violations. The result was immediate. Several Russian ships began avoiding the Baltic altogether, rerouting through longer and more dangerous paths in the North Atlantic, increasing costs and cutting profits. But Denmark did not rely solely on internal policy. It acted fully within the limits of international maritime law. According to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, coastal states have the authority to inspect any vessel passing through their territorial waters or exclusive economic zones, as long as the goal is to ensure compliance with safety, environmental protection, or anti-pollution regulations. In other words, Copenhagen did not have to declare war or break any treaties. It simply used the very same rules of the sea, the ones Putin had exploited to hide his tankers, against him. The move caught Moscow completely off guard. The Kremlin tried to protest, calling the measures an environmental disguise for economic sabotage. But Denmark held firm. We are simply protecting our environment and our sovereign right to ensure safety in our waters. It was the perfect narrative, clean, legal, and untouchable. And while the world saw nothing more than environmental inspection, Denmark had delivered a surgical logistical strike at the heart of Russia's ghost fleet. When the first Russian ships began being detained in Danish ports, the effect was immediate and devastating. Russia, which had been using its ghost fleet to keep the war's cash flow alive, saw a crucial part of that system grind to a halt. Every day of delay in oil exports means millions of dollars lost, not just in direct sales, but in logistics costs, storage, and penalties for breaching contracts. And since more than 40% of Russia's federal revenue still comes from energy exports, this paralysis has started slowly choking Moscow's war economy. Western economic analysts estimate that if the shadow fleet continues to be blocked from safe routes like the Danish Strait, Russia could lose up to $10 billion per quarter. The Kremlin, long accustomed to funding its war with disguised oil money, now faces a problem that neither propaganda nor censorship can fix. The cash flow is drying up, and that was exactly Denmark's intention: to strike at the invisible machinery keeping Russian bombs falling over Ukraine. But Copenhagen knew that an economic blow of this scale would not go unnoticed. In the weeks following the start of the inspections, Denmark detected a surge in Russian naval provocations near Bornholm, an island strategically located in the heart of the Baltic Sea. In response, the Danish government reinforced the local garrison with coastal surveillance radars, anti-ship systems, and additional navy detachments. F-16 fighter jets began conducting regular patrols over the area, while Danish frigates started escorting commercial vessels to ensure the safety of maritime traffic. The message was clear: if Moscow wanted to turn the Baltic into a zone of intimidation, it would face resistance. Denmark's move also inspired its allies. Sweden and Norway, both with long coastlines facing the North Atlantic and the North Sea, began studying similar measures, tightening inspections and expanding the tracking of suspicious vessels. In a short time, a simple national initiative began transforming into a united NATO front, creating an almost impenetrable barrier for Russian oil tankers. The Skagen Strait, once just a maritime passage, became an economic defense line, an invisible wall built not with missiles, but with laws and enforcement. And that is perhaps the most symbolic part of the entire story. While Russia tries to sustain a war of tanks, drones, and artillery, Denmark is proving that modern wars are won with strategy, not size. Without firing a single shot, it managed to weaken the financial engine powering Russia's offensive and turned the European maritime map into a legal containment field against the Kremlin. In the end, what Denmark did was turn bureaucracy into a weapon. While Moscow pours billions into missiles, drones, and tanks, Copenhagen used something far simpler: laws, inspections, and geography. It was a non-military offensive, but with a strategic impact as deep as a naval blockade. Environmental and safety inspections alone will not end the conflict, but they represent a new kind of pressure. Every ship detained, every certificate verified, every ballast tank inspected is a reminder that modern wars are not won only on the battlefield. They are also decided in maritime courts, in ports, and in the economic zones where the money for war has to flow. And now, what began as a simple environmental policy is becoming a model of European resistance, a way to fight a larger enemy without facing it head-on. The question is, if other nations follow Denmark's example, could this network of laws and inspections become what sanctions alone could not, the true turning point of the war? And while Denmark is choking Putin's war economy through the laws of the sea, Ukraine is doing the impossible in the skies. The Russian fleet, once seen as impenetrable, is now collapsing under a wave of low-cost drones with surgical precision. What was once Russian airspace has become Ukrainian territory, and what remained of Moscow's air supremacy now lies in ruins. If you want to understand how Ukraine destroyed billions of dollars worth of Russian air defenses and is rewriting the rules of modern warfare, watch this video now. Russia's $1 billion air defenses just collapsed. Ukraine rules the skies. It's the perfect continuation of this story, where the invisible war of economics meets the silent war of drones.